So next we're going to look at checkboxes and radio buttons. They're kind of similar, but they have slightly different functions. If you want to get the user to express a choice, you often do that through one of these two widgets. So checkboxes usually are ticked or checked, or empty, and express usually a yes, no, or a true, false. Radio buttons allow for more options. Okay, so not just true or false. So you can have this radio button, that radio button, or another one, but usually only one choice out of those radio buttons. Okay, so let's, if you wanted to select a pizza type, thinking of one of our examples, you're only going to have one sort of pizza base. So you'd have a radio button to say, I want the Napolitana, I want the marinara. And if I select marinara, then the other buttons become unselected. So margarita and Napolitana are not selected when I select marinara. But for the toppings, I might have no toppings, I might have all 4 toppings. So we use checkboxes for each topping. So for each topping, I can choose whether to have extra, extra sausage, extra anchovies. So I'd have a checkbox for each of those, which can be true or false. And then that way I can get lots of different combinations of things. If you use radio buttons for the toppings, then you'd only be able to choose one topping, because with the radio buttons, only one choice is selected at a time. These are very similar to the entry text field. So they have a variable that controls what happens to the information. So we bind a Boolean variable for a checkbox or an integer variable for radio buttons, so the code can determine what the user's chosen. So here's an example, example 3, with a checkbox, a button, and a text field. So we'll start off with a checkbox then. And so let's have a look at what's going on. So we've got this, the clicked method. As you see, all these examples have a click method, which is what happens when the button is pressed. When the button is pressed, the click method will either say, we'll set up this result string saying the checkbox is checked or the checkbox is not checked. So it's only, all it's going to do is record what the user's done. Then we've got the, just going through it quickly, we've got the setting up the window as before. Then we create a Boolean variable that's called checkState, and it's initially set to true. Okay, so that means the checkbox will normally initially be set to true. And we create a check button, which is bound to that Boolean variable. So you can see there's checkState, there's checkState is our Boolean variable, and that is bound to the check button, so that one reflects the other. And we put the check button, we put some text next to the check button that says choose, and we put the check button in column 0. Let's run that one as well, just to see it working. So there it is. You can see there's the GUI that this produces. So the checkbox is checked. There's a bit of text next to the checkbox called choose, and the click me is going to do something in this output field. Okay, so going back to the code, yeah, that's what it looks like. And then finally, down the bottom here, there's this is same as the last example. We've got a text field where we put the output, and that's bound to this output string variable, okay, which is what we use. So the output string variable is what we use here in the clicked method. So when the user presses clicked from this button, okay, so the button is bound to the clicked method, as you can see there. When the user presses the button, then the click method gets called. It looks at the state of the check state variable, which will either be true or false, depending on whether the user has checked it or not. And then it sets up the output, and it puts the output in this, it puts this output string, which is either checkbox is checked or checkbox is not checked, in the output text field. Okay, so by adjusting this output string var, which is bound to the output text field. Okay, so just to demonstrate that, if I click now, it says checkbox is checked. If I uncheck it, it says checkbox is not checked. So it's just checking what this variable is set to and adjusting the text here accordingly. Okay, so that's what it looks like. And then the next example has 3 radio buttons doing a similar sort of thing. So the radio buttons, as I said, often you bind them to an integer variable. Okay, so what's going to happen here when the button is pressed, click sets the output to record what's going to happen. Let me show you that. So there are the 3 radio buttons, and as you can see, whenever I select whichever I want, it will mean that when I select one, it means that anything that's already selected gets unselected. So I'm only allowed to select 1 radio button at a time, and when I click me, it just tells me which button is checked. Okay. So here's the code. There's the click method. When the button is pressed, all it's doing, as in the previous examples, is just recording the state of what the user selected. Then here is where we create the radio buttons. So this chunk of code here, you can see we create an integer variable, which is initially set to 1. And if you remember when it came up, the GUI was set to 1. So the 1 was selected. The values that go alongside these things are 0, 1, and 2. So these are set in this array or this list here. Okay, I could put something else there. But that's what I've chosen to put in. And then I loop over that list, creating 3 radio buttons. So we've got three items in the list. I loop over the list, creating 3 radio buttons, which are bound to that that integer variable. They're bound to the selected. Okay, so when I select one of those buttons, that then gets reflected in this selected variable. Then we got, as before, we got a button, and then we put the output as before. You know, when the user clicked, it puts it in this text field. Notice in this case, I've done a slightly different thing. I've put them in row 1, so the button and the text field, they're like the previous example, but they're now in row 1. And I've also made the text field span 2 columns. So let me just show you some of the things that I can do with that. Okay, so the first thing is, there's the code. Obviously, I can have as many of those radio buttons as I want. So I can have 3, 4. Okay, Control Shift F10. And the code in there, I've now got 4 buttons. You can't see the 4th one because it's fallen off the edge of the GUI. I'd have to make the GUI a bit bigger. Okay, let's get rid of those. What else can I do? I can notice the column span here is quite important. Well, it's quite a minor thing, but it's to do with the layout. It's quite important because the column spans the 2 columns. It's going to line up underneath these 2. If I got rid of that line or that entry, Control Shift F10, then I'm going to get a very odd layout because now the text field, which has got this width of 30, is now just underneath the 1 and not underneath 1 and 2. So using the grid, you can use this grid for sort of basic layouts. You can decide, I want, you know, this widget is going to be, it's quite a big widget, so it's quite wide, so I need it to be under 2 of the buttons rather than just 1. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about this example. Obviously, it's very modifiable. You could, change what the initial thing is set to, the initial selection is set to. So there, it's now set to 0 because this selected variable reflects which one of these values we get to start with. So if I set it to 2, it'll, oops, not 3 because we haven't got 3 in the list. Set it to 2, it should come up there with 2 selected. Okay, so that's what it looks like. And then, as you saw, when I select one and hit the click me button, it just reflects what is in the it's been selected by the user. Obviously, it's this is not a good way to use GUIs to tell the user what they've already selected, because they can see what they've selected. But this means that when we get to more examples further on, we can use the code to detect what the user selected and then construct the output. So if this was a set of pizzas, we can decide which pizza they've selected. All right, I'm going to finish that video there, and we'll move on to looking at one final example before we get on to the main ones.